Good evening. My name is Christy, and I would like to welcome you to the Doylestown Bookshop's virtual events series. We are thrilled to welcome Toni Bentley as she discusses her new book, Serenade, which I have right here, with Ellen Dunkel, dance critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Our guests will be in conversation for about 30 minutes. Following that, we will take questions from you, the viewers. If you would like to submit a question, click on Ask a Question on your screen and submit your questions there. If you're watching from a phone or tablet, click the icon with the question mark. If you would like to purchase Serenade from the Doylestown or Lahaska bookshops, click the button on your screen that says Buy the Book. Now, a little bit about our guests. Toni Bentley danced with George Balanchine's New York City Ballet for 10 years. She is the author of 5 New York Times notable books, including Winter Season, A Dancer's Journal, Holding On to the Air, and The Surrender, an erotic memoir. Bentley is a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, and her work has appeared in the Best American Essays as well as in many periodicals, including the New York Times Book Review, the New Yorker, the Wall Street Journal, Vanity Fair, and many more. Ellen Dunkel is the dance critic at the Philadelphia Inquirer. She also has contributed to Dance Magazine, Point, Dance Teacher, Stage Bill, and The Bergen Record. She has been covering dance for more than 25 years. She is also an online editor at the Inquirer and an ice dancer. Good evening, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. So, yeah.
Lovely.
Yes. So I guess I'm assigned to get started, and
Yes, I'll be back for the Q&A.
Okay, sounds great. So I wanted to welcome Toni. I'm a big fan. I've been a big fan probably since Winter Season came out, I guess in 1982. I own 2 copies of the book. I just can't possibly leave home without it. And I wanted to talk just a little bit to the Philadelphia area audience about why Serenade and New York City Ballet and Mr. Balanchine are all important to Philadelphia. And the reason is that Pennsylvania Ballet, now known as Philadelphia Ballet, was started by a Balanchine protege, Barbara Weisberger, and she was Balanchine's first child student when he came to the United States. All of his other students were not only about to join the company in sort of like late teenager or adults, but they were also from Philadelphia. They came from Catherine and Dorothy Littlefield's school. And Barbara Weisberger was a child. She was 8 years old. She was, as I said, the only child student, and she was sitting under the piano while Mr. Balanchine choreographed Serenade for his students who would soon be his dancers. And she talked her entire life about how special that was and how she was the only one who could say that. And later in life, he helped her create Pennsylvania Ballet, and he also gave her numerous of his ballets for free that she could use to start her company, and he helped her in every sort of way. So it's very exciting that we have Toni here and that we can talk about Serenade and Mr. Balanchine and New York City Ballet. So Toni, you said that you would do a little bit of a reading from the book, and then we'll get into a question and answer.
Yes. And I love your story about Barbara Berger, who I never had the good fortune to meet. But her story, as you tell it, is such a great example of how he launched many generations of dancers who are all over the country and all over the world at this point that in some ways trained with him and started with him. He kind of launched a real flotilla of dancers, choreographers, and company leaders. So I'm going to read actually from the very beginning of the book, a good place to start. So I don't really need to set it up for you. The section is called Curtain Up. The violins begin. It is 8:07 p.m. I know this because that is when the 8 p.m. performance starts. Serenade is always first. Always the opener of 3 ballets. The hors d'oeuvre, Mr. B would say, of the meal he served to his audience night after night in his restaurant, his theater of beauty. 5 minutes earlier, our handsome stage manager, Perry Sylvie, had called, "Places, please." This is the cue to take a last sip of water from the hallway water fountain beside the elevator, just beyond the backstage area. I wet my fingers and smooth down any remaining stray wisps of hair. Not a single one is out of place. It can't be. I rub a finger across my teeth to remove any pink lipstick that migrated over, and then smooth some Vaseline on my teeth. This way, if my mouth gets dry on stage, my lips won't stick to my teeth. That's a bad moment, liplessness. I have just finished sewing with big broad stitches in thick beige crochet thread and a large darning needle, the half-inch tips of my tightly knotted toe shoe ribbons inside the ankle ribbons. Not everyone does this. Some just tuck them inside. I used to tuck too, but although I never had one come loose, the thought alone eventually became so worrying that I started sewing them in. It's not that your shoe would come off. That simply does not happen to a professional dancer. It's unthinkable. But that little half-inch of extra ribbon would protrude from your ankle and wreck the smooth line of your inner leg and foot. And ballet is all about lines if it's about anything. Tying our ribbons is a practical necessity, while sewing their tips is an aesthetic one. Excuse me. Thus, they are of equal concern. The ends are sewn in, security. We all flock around the rosin box like hummingbirds at a feeder. Rosin on the heels of the tights to anchor the inside of the shoe, then rosin all over the flat toe tip, the sides, the shank. Next girl. Now the water bucket. A quick dip about 2 inches deep with a flexed foot, shoe and all. Excuse me. Soaking the heel not only shrinks the satin around the ankle for extra traction, but also forms a sticky paste with the rosin inside the heel of the shoe and wrecks your tights. Despite nightly washing, they become permanently hardened, darkened at the heels, crunchy with embedded rosin. Ready. The shoes, the hair, a high tight bun, no glitter, no tiara, no pastel flower bouquets. We don't even wear the usual small stud rhinestone earrings that we do for most other ballets, which shed occasional sparkles as we move. Serenade is matte. Never in any ballet do we wear personal jewelry that would distract, indicating one's offstage life. On stage, we are other. Then the costume, the tight blue bodice secured by invisible nude elastic straps, is shaped by vertical princess seams, 360 degrees around, to cling to our slim torsos. The matching blue tulle to the ankles has 2 translucent panels running the full length of each leg in front. At 8:04, everything is secure, in place. It's all I've got, all I can control. Once the ballet begins, who knows? The variables are endless. The tempos, the new girl, a blown light in the fourth wing, a slip that could end in tearful embarrassment or end your career completely with a torn Achilles tendon or a chipped hip bone. We were dancing on the edge before we knew where it was, but we knew what it was. And so I learned early on that everything, anything that is beautiful is perched on a precipice. Mr. B placed us there, and it was trust in him that gave us balance. I think I'll stop there.
You mentioned in the book that you first danced Serenade as a student at the SAB workshop.
Ooh, I don't hear you very well, Ellen.
Yeah, Ellen, your audio is okay.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
I'm gonna have to hold these. So
Much better.
Okay. You mentioned that you first in the book that you first danced Serenade in the School of American Ballet workshop, and that
Yes.
later on you were thrown into the ballet as a professional. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what it was like to first dance it as a student, and then what it was like to be thrown on, and how dancing it had changed over the course of your career.
Yes, certainly. I was very fortunate. It kind of echoed the many generations of Balanchine. You know, he said he initially made this ballet in 1934 with the dancers who were available, and they weren't highly trained, and they weren't all trained together the way we were at the end of his life. We were like at the School of American Ballet, and they were turning out thoroughbreds on a very, very high level. And he always said he made this ballet to teach his students how to dance. So it's very a lovely kind of eternal return that it happened to be for me and for everyone that year. The year that Suki Shore, I think, first taught workshop in 1974, I believe, and I was one of the girls learning Serenade, and it was the first Balanchine ballet I ever learned. Um, and I had never seen it performed because I was at the school. We didn't go to the company, and they didn't, you know, they were very sold out in those years, so they didn't give free tickets. Back in the,
Right.
you know, 50s, I think they papered the house. But anyway, so it was an incredible experience, very exciting, and we were all amazed. We had to stand at first. The first step is parallel. And as I write in the book, our whole life training is to stand turned out. And it's a famous moment of those of you who know the ballet where everyone is sort of in parallel like this, and then they suddenly flip the feet out. And it's a very beautiful moment, kind of declaring the beginning of like the art form in a sense. Um, and then just, it wasn't too many years later, 3 or 4 years later, after I'd gotten in the company, I became an understudy for one of the Russian girls, which is a really special place, still kind of in the corps de ballet, not one of the three soloists, but who dances the Russian dance. So the Russian girls actually have the actual most dancing on time, at time on stage. It's very, very puffy. And yes, there was a big snafu. I was, as an understudy, I learned it in the back, but I never danced it with all the girls. And then I was thrown on with a few hours notice, with a 30-minute rehearsal to get, and there's a lot of intersections in this ballet and people like coming in and going. Anyway, I made it through everything but one place, and it was a pretty bad place because I was in the front of some groups hopping into the center of the stage and then back out, and everyone hopped out, and all by myself in the front of the stage, I hopped in. And well, I can only say as a young dancer, you want to die. It's just horrendous. Anyway, but I survived. And Balanchine famously didn't, those weren't things he minded. He minded if you didn't give your all, and he minded if you held things back. He didn't mind if you slipped. He didn't mind if you fell. He didn't really mind if you made a mistake. He knew you couldn't really ruin any of his ballets. They were so beautifully constructed. And then I danced it, I think, about 50 times in the course of the 10 years I was in the company. I danced it always. Yeah.
In fact, you mentioned that at a certain point you were dancing and you kind of fell almost right on top of him. So,
Yeah. Yes.
but he didn't mind that either.
No, he didn't flinch. He was quite brave. You know, he was standing in the front wing, and we dance in this fantastic paper snow in the Nutcracker snow scene at the end of the first act, and it's very slippery, and already you're in pointe shoes and you're flying around. And yeah, I skidded right down at his feet, and he didn't flinch. I mean, I could have hit him, but yeah, Mr. B was quite a cool cucumber, one might say.
So I know most dancers that I talk to today who dance Balanchine ballets, and that's quite a lot of them, they're all a bit jealous of anyone who had any sort of experience dancing with him. What was it like? And I know that you mentioned in the book that you didn't have a ton of interactions with him. So what was it like? Was he nice? Was he intimidating? How did it seem?
Well, it's very hard to describe, and I make an attempt in this book to do that because he is a figure unlike any other figure in one's life. I mean, in a very small way, he's a father figure because he's kind of our boss. But he was a very great artist, and even as very young dancers in the school and then in the company, we lived really in a world that he invented. And it was really, he'd say in company class, when he'd talk to us, he'd say, "Oh, now that we are alone, we can talk." And, maybe he'd do a little gossiping about critics or something. And it was a very insular world in which, as a choreographer, he's not like a painter or a composer where they can do things alone, or a poet, or he requires not only one dancer, but many dancers to make his work. So it's a very unique setting. I felt intimidated, and a lot of people did, but he was not intimidating. Yes, if I could do it over, I would have chatted to him more. He was very open to stopping and talking and doing whatever. And some girls did, but my kind of European upbringing, he was so godlike to me, as he was to everyone. I didn't think he would really be that interested in me asking him, "How is the weather, Mr. B?" So, but most of all, we just loved him. We all just loved him in a way, a lifelong love that I think I can speak for everyone who danced for him. It's a lifelong love that I will, take till the end of my life. A man who makes this kind of beauty is a very, very rare and special thing to have had in one's life. It's an unbelievable privilege. And the more that time goes on, the more I realize what luck. Yes, I went to the school and I had, the various physical components and mental components to become a very good dancer so that he would choose me for the company. But still, there's an element of luck to absolutely everything in one's life. And the fact that I was there in the last years of his life and came to know this world and came to know his teachings, because he was really a teacher more than anything.
Yeah, it seemed like also you mentioned that despite that you didn't have so many personal interactions, you did actually visit him right near the end of his life, and he did know who you were, and he did mention,
Yeah.
"Oh yes, you're the writer." So was that it?
Yes.
How did that feel?
Well, that was, very emotional for everyone because he was in the hospital, and I think we all knew he was dying, though we couldn't believe it. He said he would live forever, and they couldn't diagnose what was wrong with him, and he was 79, which to all of us, and I think to him was young. And, a year before that, he was making his, last masterpieces, Mozartiana, David's Bonatanza. He was, certainly still at the height of his powers, one might say. But he was in the hospital for many months before he died. And they weren't able to diagnose what was wrong with him till after he died. And it was quite a rare disease, Jakob Creutzfeldt disease. And I think if they had diagnosed him, they could not have saved him, I think.
Right.
But I went to visit him by myself. I didn't know if they'd let me in. I didn't really know visiting hours. I didn't know really too much about the whole thing. I just knew, and I think many of us felt that way. Some people went in little groups. Some people, everyone just took it upon themselves. But he had told the nurses at Roosevelt Hospital who came to know who he was, and I think many of them were quite in love with him too, and they only knew him as a patient in the hospital. He was an incredibly, charming man. He was kind of like Fred Astaire, or like he had the heritage of imperial Russia in his blood, and then he went through Europe and he absorbed modernism. He was and yet he didn't, he spoke very simply, do you like wine? Do you like champagne? He was a man of very, very few words. He didn't write any books. There's a book with his name on it written with Francis Mason about the ballets, but, he didn't write a memoir. He left like a couple of notes. We have almost nothing written from him. So I went to visit him, and I prepared myself in what I regard now as quite a silly outfit of red overalls. But, I was very young, and I guess I thought that was the thing to wear. And yes, I had written my first book, Winter Season, and he had read it. It's very possible it was about the last book he read before he wasn't able anymore. And I had reports from people that he liked it a lot, especially when they had they'd serialized it for a week in the New York Post and made it sound rather sensational, which it was not. But anyway, that amused him. He loved popular culture, Charlie's Angels and, television shows and things. And when I stood at the door, he said, the writer, which did surprise me because I didn't know what he'd remember. I mean, he's George Balanchine. It's maybe my sense of self at the time that it's like, does he know who I am? But he did. He knew who everyone was. And of course, he was a master psychologist. He never discussed it, but clearly he could see you walk into a room or do a plie in a class, and he knew everything about you.
Amazing. Let's see what else. So yeah, you mentioned that he never wrote a memoir, that he didn't write it down, that basically his ballets were his story. Yet you managed to get an awful lot of his story and a lot of history in general about Tchaikovsky, about Lincoln Kirstein, about everybody. So I know that you told me the other day that you spent 15 years working on this book, and also that it was sort of like like a sister book to Winter Season, which was quite a long time ago. So maybe you can talk about how the two of them relate and how you managed to do all that work.
Well, okay, yes. So yes, Winter Season was in fact published 40 years ago this year. Wow. To my own great astonishment. And of course, I regard them as kind of, as you put it, sister books or bookends, because I am still very much that girl. And also I write about Winter Season, for those of you who don't know it, was just my diary as a dancer for him it was published when I was 22 years old and I was still dancing for him. And he was still alive then, obviously. And then this book, the reason it took so long is it started out as a different book. One hears this a lot from writers. Things develop. And it started out as the idea of just a history of this very famous great ballet, kind of like writing a history of King Lear or Hamlet, of a great master's, one of his greatest works, Balanchine made over 450 works, of which I believe about a close 110, 120 are extant and still danced around the world. And then, Balanchine aficionados would have a fun conversation. What are your top fives, your top tens, as you might do with a writer or, Henry James or somebody. Serenade is almost always near the top of everybody's list. It's since the book was only published a week ago, but I have gotten so much feedback already of people saying, it's my favorite ballet, it's my favorite ballet, it's my favorite ballet. Which doesn't surprise me, but it's lovely to actually hear that. So I guess I did a certain amount of research and a few interviews, but in the end, briefly said, I obviously didn't want to write a kind of an academic history of the ballet because I'm a very personal writer. I've always written very, from Winter Season to other things I've done. I'm sort of a memoirist of sorts. And I also, I was very insecure about doing him and the ballet justice. That caused many years of delay, basically. Now, I wasn't working on the book all that time, but I was doing many, many other things. I was avoiding the book, but that's that can be quite
exhausting. About right.
So, yes, yes, as a writer, you know what I mean. I did many, many other things. And then I finally decided a few years ago, I'm either going to finish this. I'd done, 10 or 15,000 words. I'm either going to finish this or I'm going to get it off the desk in my mind. And I still thought, and at that point, after so long, I thought this is impossible. And it's still hard for me to believe that here I am, it's published, it's on the shelf. It still feels a little surreal because I wrote an entire diary about why I could not write this book. And it's very succinctly put. I think I couldn't write it. It's fair to say now I wasn't ready by definition.
Yeah.
Write it till I could. And maybe this is a very long way round of saying that I wanted to write the book I wanted to write. And it took for me a lot of courage to write about him with all the love that I feel,
Yeah.
because that's very risky in writing. I hate sentimental writing. Also, he was a very otherworldly creature that is very difficult to write about. So, it's kind of like, writing about sex and writing about praying and writing about movement and George Balanchine are incredibly, I would say they're impossible to write about. So if one succeeds somewhat, that is the success, because a Balanchine ballet is, I would say, it's certainly 3 dimensions with the music, and really it's maybe 4. There's always many layers of other components. One might use the word spiritual, for example, of what he conveyed, like great artists do, like Shakespeare, like Mozart, like Bach. These are the multi-layered artists of the first order, and he was one of them. So it's easy. I mean, I'm still unworthy, but I guess I just said I'm going to do it anyway, and this is what I did. So it became this mix. Certainly, the history of Serenade is in there, and there's some history of him leading basically up to his making of Serenade. Like, who was this man who made this ballet? Where was he in his life? And he'd had a very layered and tumultuous, dramatic life up to the point that he arrived in America. He'd basically grown up in, aristocratic Tsarist Russia, as basically all the students at the ballet school there were wards of the Tsar, who paid out of his own purse for their training, velvet, chocolate boxes, velvet lined things. And then the Bolsheviks came in and he almost died of starvation and cold, and his health never completely recovered. And then he went to Diaghilev. So he arrived in America at Ellis Island, like so many have, in late 1933, and started Serenade in early 1934. It was very historic, his first ballet in America. And the ballet is, among other things, as I write in the book, it is about him turning this very aristocratic art, which it always will be, but he also, he democratized it. He made us all aristocrats. He didn't lower us. He raised all of us, right? He raised, because the corps de ballet and Serenade is everything. We're all, us and the 3 soloists are all dressed alike. We all look alike. We mingle. They stand out, but like, we are all one. We are them. They are us. We are like woman. He said he always gave his whole life to celebrating woman. And so we all represent a part of that in Serenade.
Amazing. So I was very interested also, you talk about how ballet kind of started in the court of Louis XIV and sort of traced it. And like, I knew something about Louis XIV. I didn't realize that he danced every day for 20 years.
Yes.
And I did know that he was basically now the Paris Opera Ballet and the school. But basically, if not for Louis XIV, we might not have ballet. And if not for Mr. Balanchine, we might not have ballet in America. I mean, I know the Christensen brothers started San Francisco Ballet before Balanchine came to the United States, but it didn't seem like they spread out the same way, and that he very intentionally spread ballet across America.
Yes, yes. It's amazing. Yes, Louis XIV, it's fantastic. I'm sure many people might recall this famous photo. It's a photo of a drawing of the costume he wore when he was the Sun King. He's famously called the Sun King, and that's because of his debut, I think, at about the age of 14, as the Sun King, where he's like radiating from his wrists, from his neck, from his head. And it was the announcement of his very long reign, the longest reign, I think, of well over 70 years. He was the king of France. And Louis loved to dance, as you say. Yes, he started studying as a little boy every morning, privately, of course, behind in one of his chambers of his royal, boudoir. And he loved to dance, and all many different records seem to say he was actually very good. And if you look at the portraits of Louis XIV, including the most famous one that's kind of his official one, he has these fantastically turned out feet and beautiful sculpted muscular legs. So Yes, one could say he's the father of classical ballet, and of course that's why all the terms are in French around the world. Wherever you go, you know, tombe, plie, glissade, rond de jambe, they're all French terms. Um,
Right.
and this all began with Louis XIV, and as you said, he pulled up a royal charter to start the first national ballet school in all of history.
So
And
amazing.
yeah,
And then
it was his teacher that invented turnout.
yeah, amazing.
Um,
Is
yes.
it? Hi.
Hi, Chrissy.
Hi. Hi. So I'm gonna cut in. We do have a
Okay.
question. If anyone else has questions, please submit them now. So we have a question, excuse me, for Toni from Jim. Hi, Toni. When Balanchine created a ballet, was he strict in terms of what he wanted, or was it more organic? Where would he watch the dancer rehearse his choreography and then change it? And did he ask the dancers for their input?
Well, I was fortunate, though, as I said, I came in toward the end of his life to be what we would call an original in a number of ballets that he made. Union Jack in 1976, Ballade. They kind of redid square dance. Anyway, a number of them. So in terms of him being in class, but specifically choreographing, he was very gentle and he was very gentlemanly and good humored. He never raised his voice. He ended up with a kind of 2 damaged lungs. He was not a screamer. He was not one of these like raging great artists. I know some of them do, like Picasso and doing their big dramas. Balanchine was very low drama, and it's an incredible lesson that because that kind of thing in our society, I think, is still romanticized. The suffering artist or the one having a meltdown or something. Balanchine, and the time I knew him, was quiet. He was gentlemanly. He'd come in the room. All you would know, you'd see on the rehearsal schedule the night before, time, like 12 to 2, main hall, your name or would be called, and it would say new ballet and who was running it. It would have the pianist's name, and then it would say Balanchine, and then you knew, oh, there's going to be a new Balanchine ballet, and it would just show up at 7:30 the night before on the schedule, and you'd go in, and then you would find out probably what the music was. You maybe not even the title. And he would begin, as he famously did with Serenade in 1934. He would come over and he would, listen to some music, and he would take us and he'd say, okay, you stand here, dear, you stand here, and then you do this, and then maybe you do a bit of this, and maybe a bit of that. And then he'd play the music, and then you do it, and he'd maybe change it. Or what would often happen is it became somewhat collaborative, not on purpose, but a dancer would try and execute what he showed or asked for, and they do it wrong. And sometimes he'd say, no, like more like this. And sometimes he'd say, yes, that's good, like that. So it truly was what one might call organic. And in a slow, quiet way, at the end of 2 hours, he would have choreographed sometimes, many minutes of a 30-minute ballet that would be, exquisite and beautiful and be ending up what was on stage. It flowed out of him like water, no Sturm und Drang. Now, when he was younger, I'm sure, he had many wives and many things happened in his life, but this was the George Balanchine that I knew.
Wow.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you for that. And that's it for questions. If anyone else has a question, please click on Ask a Question on your screen and submit your questions there. Also, if you would like to purchase a copy of Serenade from the Doylestown or Lahaska bookshops, please click the button on the screen that says Buy the Book. I have it right here. It's gorgeous. I would recommend it. Ellen?
It is.
Yeah.
I may say, unusually, I have a copy without under the case. And can you all see this gorgeous ballerina who is echoed on the cover on this gorgeous pink page?
Oh, that's
it's so beautiful, unusual.
Oh,
See that
wow.
when I hold it up inside? Yeah,
Beautiful.
it's kind of like a little hidden
gorgeous.
secret. Yeah.
Love that. Ellen, I'm going to let you get back to it
Okay.
since we have a little more time and we don't have
Yeah.
questions. Okay.
So I think I was starting to say also, if not for Balanchine, that we might not have ballet across the United States because, as I know from Barbara Weisberger and other people know in general, kind of right before the Ford Foundation announced that they were going to give money for various arts organizations, but definitely ballet, he had invited teachers from all around the country to New York to say, hey, there should be ballet companies across the country, and I want you to go out and go forth and do it. So, do you think that um, what I'm trying to say is that it seems like there might not be so much ballet across the United States if not for Mr. B. Do you agree with that?
Completely. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the hypotheticals, but if you look at the moment, Miami City Ballet, run by Lourdes Lopez, who was my era, I danced with her. We were roommates on tour. Peter Bowl is running Pacific Northwest Ballet. These are two excellent, very high quality companies. Helgi Thomason, who is now retiring after, I think, 30 something years, ran San Francisco Ballet. Peter Bowl, Helgi, these were all in my years of dancing for Balanchine. So the spawning, and that went on for many years before my time. Nikolai Uba, who runs the Royal Danish Ballet, came and danced with us, I think, with New York City Ballet. Yes, and various Maria Tolchief, who's now passed, but she ran the Chicago City Ballet. These are all city ballet dancers. So while everyone isn't, it's all over the world. And of course, there are many, many now who stage his ballets, which are always very much wanted for the Balanchine Trust. And many of them are my peers from the company who go all around the world staging Balanchine ballets. So yes, I mean, he launched, not only was he great, he was also very prolific. And so there are many, many ballets of different sizes. Serenade is a total of 26, 27 dancers, depending on alternates total. And then some are like 8 people, and then some are 70 people, Bizet and some of the, Symphony can be very large. So the scope of his work is incredible, as is the scope of the music, which
Yeah.
Defines it for him, the music.
Yeah, amazing. So one thing you mentioned also is that the dancers of Serenade are sort of the quote unquote granddaughters of the Sylph Swans, et cetera, and the sort of classical fairy tale ballet. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, well, so Marie Taglioni was the first ballerina who went on point, and she was really the first sylph. I mean, there's many other dancers, but to sort of pick a particular icon. So all through the 1900s, we had ballets like La Sylphide, and then Swan Lake, the great Tchaikovsky ballets, where dancers are often under spells. They're sylphs, they're dryads, they're naiads, they're always these otherworldly creatures, and often there's a mortal man chasing them, right? And he can't get them, or when he gets them, they die, or in La Sylphide, that's what happens. And then Giselle is perhaps the continuing one of the what I consider the 4 great cornerstones of classical ballet before Balanchine, where you have in the second act the Willies, and they are maybe the most well-known of this sylphs. They have the long white, gorgeous tulle dresses to their ankles or knees, depending on the production. Sometimes little wings, and where the willies come from. There's a wonderful story, I won't go into it now, of the origins of that by Théophile Gautier of the story, but they are representing in their white, they are representing virgins who were jilted by their fiancés. They were betrayed by men and they died. And they have all banded together. It's quite an interesting story. And they have all banded together with Myrta as their queen in the forest. And at night, I think they sleep, or they hibernate all day, or they fix their tutus. I don't know what they do during the day, but at night, the willies come out And any man that shows up, including then Albrecht, the hero of Giselle, they try and dance him to death as punishment. So they're really, while they're a very lovely, fluffy, feminine, ethereal creature dressed in tulle, the Willies are really very ferocious beings. And I like that juxtaposition is very interesting. So all of this is to say that so many of the great ballerina figures of the 18th, 19th into early 20th century are these ethereal sylphs, and they have stories. And interestingly, the costumes that we've had since 1952 for Serenade are basically the same costume, but we are in this very beautiful, what we call Serenade blue, this very particular blue. But it's the same kind of costume denoting, a sylph. But in Serenade, Balanchine, I sort of, as I say, he streamlined one could say, all of 19th century ballet, these 3 acts. And, in Swan Lake, there's like Rothbart and there's spells and there's all this story. And in Serenade, Balanchine said, there is no story but a dance in the moonlight. Now, I talk in the book about, there are, in fact, many, many stories, but as a great master, he knew better than to tell people what to think. He respected his audience, and you go and see the ballet, and if you think there's no story, that's fine. If you think it's your own story, that's fine. And if you think it's many different stories of many different archetypes of women, that's fine too. They're probably all true. Dance art is can be a mirror reflection to show us our deeper selves or our greater selves. And so in Serenade, in 32 minutes, to Tchaikovsky, the great father of classical ballet, who did Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, La Bayadère, these iconic ballets that will be with us forever by Petipa. He kind of took out the story, he took out the wings, he took out the spells, he took out the men who betrayed us, he took out all of that, and he just has us dance. And to me, that he made us all our own heroines. That's why I think it's just such a very beautiful dance. I think that's why people just love Serenade. They don't just like it, they love it. There's such a connectivity, I think, for the audience and for the dancers in this particular ballet.
Yeah, definitely. Similarly, you mentioned that there was a time when you were in class and Mr. B came up to you and said, do you want to be dancing the story ballets across the plaza, meaning at American Ballet Theater, and that you went and visited him in his office later and was like, no. So maybe
it was
maybe
one of
talk
those
about
terrible, embarrassing moments when you're a young dancer in the company. In company class, we'd be in this huge hall on the 5th floor of the New York State Theater that's above the stage, backstage. And when he would teach company class at like 10:30, and everyone was there. We all took the same class, from the newest dancer in the company, somebody like me, Suzanne Farrell, Adam Luder, Jacques d'Amboise, Patricia McBride, Allegra, but very occasionally. But I mean, from the great stars of our company down to, the newest apprentice, we're all in the same class with him. So you can imagine when he comes up to you, and then he said to me, he used to call the thing about Giselle. He said he didn't like Giselle at all. And of course, he always had a point. He called there be a rampant disease in the ballet world called Giselitis, like a kind of viral thing. And what he meant by that was dancers kind of frowning and trying to look and be soulful. And he knew
overacting.
Yes, overacting and being sort
Mhm.
of sentimental and a little bit Sarah Bernhardt-y or something. He wanted you to be yourself and to dance really well. And of course, what we all know from people like Suzanne Farrell, the more you were yourself, the more you danced beautifully, the more you listened to the music, the more your soul might actually glow through, your real soul,
Right.
not your pretend soul. Anyway, he came up to me. I can think of a few reasons now why he said it. And he said, dear, if you want to dance Giselle, you can go across the plaza, which is where American Ballet Theater dances Giselle. And we did not dance Giselle. So I was absolutely horrified. And I went to his office after class. I had a little knock on the door. He's like, oh, come in, dear. I said, Mr. B, I want to dance your ballets. I don't want to dance Giselle. He said, oh, okay, good. And then we discussed something else. You see, this is how it was so simple. Like, why did he say that to me? Because I think I was, even among a lot of perfectionists, I was very perfectionistic. Like, I was always very perfect. Maybe sometimes I had the hair over my ears like Giselle. And I was maybe, he took classical ballet, 19th century classical ballet, and he elongated everything. He had us reach out and stretch out and look up and move, and our hips were all over the place and stuff. And I was probably a little more kind of classical formal, like afraid to let go, shall we say. And so I think in that sense, he probably thought, my arabesque was probably more kind of like this than, out there. So anyway, but it had an effect. He could say so little and get to such great effect.
Mhm.
But
And he also choreographed some full-length story ballets.
Well, yes, we did Coppelia, and he brought in the wonderful Alexandra Danilova to help him put that together. I think that was in the early 70s. And of course, he has he has the famous Jewels, which is a full-length ballet, but with no plot. It's just emeralds, rubies, and diamonds. He did A Midsummer Night's Dream. Of course, he loved Shakespeare to the Mendelssohn. He did a Don Quixote that is quite an interesting and was very controversial ballet in the 60s, but was full length, where he performed Don Quixote himself on the stage.
Wow.
So everyone's amazed. With Suzanne Farrell. So yes, there are some, and now at City Ballet now, I think they do some full length things, but we had a Swan Lake, a Balanchine Swan Lake, but he just did one act. And that was a great example. I think it was the second act, and he put in, Swan Lake's usually 4 acts, right? Maybe 3 intermissions, 2 intermissions. And he basically, the way I see it is, he took all the, the best music, all the stuff that people associate with Swan Lake, and he got rid of all the hoopla and all the story and all the mime, and he gave us, a beautiful 1-act Swan Lake.
Right.
But even that was quite unusual for us, because it was still based on Petit, very much so.
And of course, there's Nutcracker, which so many companies, including Philadelphia Ballet, does. Yeah. So you mentioned also that was your first introduction to New York City Ballet, that you came and you were Candy Cane for a number of years. And you also mentioned that they were doing new costumes the first year that you came, and that your name was in the costume. And I know that's kind of a big part also of City Ballet, like looking and seeing, like, basically like the red carpet version of Who Did You Wear, but it was another dancer before you. So
right.
So that must have been
pretty
amazing.
Very exciting. Yes,
Yeah.
and Balanchine loved children, and it's a very, very much a tradition that he was. His first appearance on the stage was as a Cupid in a little box when he was 10 years old at the school in St. Petersburg. And then it's a great tradition that continues to this day. The company usually does. In my day, we did 4 or even 5 weeks of Nutcracker, 2 casts, 20 performances each. And the children that are in there in the production, he used real children, were all taken from the School of American Ballet. So I was in it. They start as young as 8 or 9. And I was in it for 4 years and then skipped about 2 years, and then was back in the company in a different role. So in a typical way, over the course of my whole career as, in the student and on, I was in maybe 6 or 7 different roles in Nutcracker. So in this way, it was very family-like,
Yeah.
We all had been through everything and been together with everyone. There was a great
amazing.
sense.
Yeah.
But a very unusual family.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hello.
I just wanted to pop back in. Hello. Just for some closing remarks, just so we can begin to wrap up.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I wanted to thank you both for joining us tonight. I really can't wait to look through this book, to read the book. Again, if anyone would like it, click the button on your screen that says buy the book. I'd like to thank both of you for joining us and taking the time to do this with us, and I hope someday, Toni, if you're in the area, if you come visit us, we'd love to have you at the store. And Ellen, if you're ever our way, please stop in and say hello.
Great.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
It was
Thank you. Well,
very
thank
fun.
you again.
Could have gone on much longer,
Yes.
but
I know. I
Yeah.
hate
Wow.
cutting.
It's a big subject. Big subject.
It was.
Thank you
It was
so
really
much,
fascinating.
Ellen. Lovely.
yeah, thank you. It was so great talking to you.
Thank you. And
Yeah,
thank you all
pleasure.
for watching. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, you too.